Good morning. Kalimera sas. I guess the fragrance I smell in the air, besides the incense, is, since this is Father's Day, in case somebody forgot, in case you did forget, but the fragrance on the grill to celebrate the one day a year that he gets to feel like he's actually in charge. But last month, I shared with you a little fact, and that has to do with, it was on Mother's Day, and I mentioned then that for us clergy of all flavors, probably the single most difficult day to create a sermon is on Mother's Day because of expectations, etc. The second hardest is today. Same reason. Expectations. Expectations because everybody has a story. Everybody has something to share with the world about his, her father. And in that vein, in that mode, I'd like to follow along a little bit. There is one man in my life that has constantly and continuously been a significant figure. The fact that he left this world 15 years ago really, in some ways, yes, has allowed me to miss him physically, but I also have to say, spiritually, he has not left. To this day, I speak with him, I converse with him, not argue so much, every once in a while, but every morning, every night, I commemorate him and my mother, and I know that they're with me during the day as issues come up, especially family issues, etc. I still go there and ask him also to ask for me, for my family, for help. And again, I say this to you on this day because I know that I am no different than anyone else and that I do miss him very much. But again, spiritually, and this is where I have to concentrate, because spiritually, he is with me always, through and with my prayers, to him, for him, and receiving the benefits of prayers from him. I need to say a couple of things about my father. Some of you knew him when he was living. And again, the story that I am repeating is so similar, maybe even identical to some of you that are here this morning. The old story, having been born and reared in the old country, a poor land, certainly then, much more even than today. But he was the oldest of 6 siblings, 5 brothers and a sister. He was the oldest. And when he was in his middle 20s, he got married to my mother. and she joined the family and moved into the house that they all shared. Maybe a grand total of, it might be, maybe a 300 square foot, the whole thing, domicile. So life was close, but they were also starving. As such, it was incumbent upon the oldest to try to find a way to put food on the table. So he did. He and some of his other friends in a little small village in the mountains of Greece. And he came here to the United States at a time when there was a great, fairly good influx of immigrants. And in his particular case, illegal immigrants. He didn't have any kind of way of coming over legally. He had, I think he told me at one point, $200, which was a ton of money back then. He and 2 or 3 others of his friends from the Joryo, the village, jumped on a freighter and came to the United States, hidden in the hole in the basement, for modern terms. And the sailor that got them on secretly would periodically bring some kind of food, some kind of handout of some sort to give to them so they could eat. I think it took them 30 days to get here. They found them when they came at Panama, because they had that was the first installment of unloading. They were discovered. They were taken by authorities, put in a jail, detention, for a number of months until they could get another boat to send them back to Greece. Well, somehow, don't know how, and he never told me, whatever, he and his buddies found a way to sneak out of there as they were moving from one ship to the other. They jumped another ship that was headed towards California. They went on to California, came back, stowed another ship, came back, and he got off in Wilmington, North Carolina, where there were relatives. By now, this was in the late 1930s. And again, a number of you have the same story going on there. He visited and worked in restaurants. What did he know? To wash dishes, wash pots, whatever it was. And in the basement, because the immigration service, Wilmington being a port town, had constantly immigration people coming by there. And of course, they were in the restaurants, and if they saw someone new, they would try to check papers. So he, during his time there, stayed in the basement to help the restaurant. Somewhere, and I don't know what year it was in the late 30s, early 40s, as things work out. He heard about another family, friends from the old country, not the same village, but nearby. And they lived in Marion, South Carolina. So he went there. Marion then was a pretty bustling community. It had a armed forces, I think it was Army, camp there, base. So he started to work for the family, and he ended up living with them for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years. As it turned out, they were my future in-laws. Go figure that one. The Second World War broke out, and my future father-in-law, the owner of the restaurant, suggested to my dad that he join the armed forces, because then it was a statement by then President Roosevelt that if an illegal alien joined the armed forces and was honorably discharged, he or she would receive their citizenship papers. That's what he did. He joined the Army, went through the basics, and did what the only thing that he had even a kin to doing was a cook for a while. But then he heard about another area that was paying extra hazardous duty pay. And he needed everything he was getting, he was sending back to his wife and parents and siblings. Everything that was going on. That was total sacrifice on his part. So he joined this other extra hazardous duty pay area as a paratrooper, a member of the 101st Airborne, which was an elite airborne like a special forces today. And that's what he did until the end of the war. Got his honorable discharge and got his citizenship papers. He and two of his friends, one of whom ended up being my nono, my godfather, and went to Williamson, West Virginia. I have no clue. All I know, it still is a tiny little town on the border of Kentucky and West Virginia, coal mining back then too. And they worked there like crazy. They bought into a restaurant, and they worked for 2 years. And that's when he sent for my mother in Greece, brought her over, and subsequently they had 2 children, one and my sister, 2 years younger than I am. Worked very, very hard. Did okay financially. What do you expect, with coal miners and not much money around? So they decided at one point, because there was no church, there were very, very few others that they could have church with. So they decided to move to another little small town in North Carolina, because there were other Greeks, friends from the villages around the area that they had both grown up with. So they moved there, and we moved there in 1952, and he worked again. They worked again. That's what I saw. There we were, struggling to make ends meet, but somehow, somewhere, some way, they did something. The both of them. They were a team. As such, they did what they could for their children and for their family. I'm trying to set this up. They wanted their children to have what they did not have, starting with education. So this was a tiny little restaurant in a little, not even a town, small community, still there today, the community, and worked like crazy to try to make money to send Tommy and my sister Georgia to school. Και θα είστε γιατροί. Εσύ θα γίνεις γιατρός, εσύ νοσοκόμα. You're going to become a doctor, and you, my sister, is going to become a nurse. Okay, and that's what we went to school thinking we were going to do. This is when, in the early and mid-1960s, when cost of food was very, very low. And I do remember the most costly thing we had on our menu in 1964 was a 7-ounce ribeye steak with 2 vegetables, a big Greek salad. My mother always made the bread, so she had the homemade bread, to psomit, to spityu, a pat of butter, coffee or tea. It was $1.75. I remember it was $1.25, and when my father had to go up in price, because in the early 60s it was $1.25, the most expensive item we had on the menu. And anyway, when it was $1.75, he had a number of people asking and complaining how he could up his price that much for what was going on. Again, you have to keep in mind this was early mid-60s. I'm saying that because when I left to go to college, they assumed, I should say, but he primarily, assumed all responsibilities for finances for yours truly. And I have to say, I did remember how hard that dollar. I remember how hard that dollar was to be earned. And I was very careful. I was very careful in my first 2 years there at Chapel Hill. Somewhere along the way, there was a change of heart on my side. And actually, it was the end of my freshman year. It was in the summer. I was home from school. And I had been praying, dreading like crazy, having to talk to him. I went to him one evening at the restaurant. We were closing up. And said, Dad, I don't want to be a doctor. He was devastated. He was devastated. Why? You know, we're trying, we're going to do everything we can, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want you to be like us, like, you know, having to do everything that we're having to do. There was no way. So, what are you going to do? I want to be a priest. Oh, what? Again, devastated, because, again, back then, remembering the times and the years and all of that, the clergy were definitely not, the best paid people in society. His words were, "Θα ψοφήσεις από πείνα, θα παίρνεις ό,τι πρόσφορο μείνει, θα το πας σπίτι σου, να φάει η οικογένειά σου." Translated, you're going to die of malnutrition, you're going to die of hunger. You realize what you're saying? What you're going to be doing is, after the church services are over, you're going to take whatever andidero is left over and take it to your home and feed your family. Again, remember the time. Well, we went back and forth for a while, not just then, but upcoming times, and he came up with a solution. He said, okay, if you want to be a priest, do me one favor. Give me one more year in pre-med at Chapel Hill. I said, okay, Dad. He said, at the end of that year, if you still don't want to stay and you want to go to Boston, I'll do it. Now, there's a little very important caveat here. Chapel Hill, back then, was $125 a semester for tuition. Room and board was $300 or $400, books, etc. The whole year, again, I was very, very careful on how much money I spent, because I knew where that money was coming from, how hard it was to get. My freshman year, I promise you, you won't believe it, but I kept meticulous books on where I was spending everything from ice cream to breakfast or whatever thing was going on. It cost me $1,350 for a year at Chapel Hill in 1966. My following year, I went back and I spent $1,500 for my year, including tuition. I'm not saying this to brag on Tommy here, I'm saying it, I remembered how much money it was costing my parents, because Boston was costing at least $13,000 to $15,000 per year. So here was my father committing to paying 10 times what he was having to pay for me at school. He was not the happiest person in the world the following year when I went to Boston, not because of what he was paying out, but because he really thought that the best for his family, the best for his child and subsequent family, was going to be a doctor. And I'm saying this, please, those of you immigrants know that for most families overseas, certainly in that part of the world, the epitome of success on this earth was to be a doctor, because they were in demand and there was few financial problems. Again, that was then. The whole point is, being there and doing all of these things, every day I would wake up and watch my father and my mother work like dogs, anywhere from 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, of course getting up earlier to set it up, and going to bed sometime around 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. Every morning, before he left the house, which was upstairs and the restaurant was downstairs, every morning when he would go downstairs to the restaurant to set up, he would stop and do his stuff it all and go on with his day. Same thing with my mother. At night, they would come upstairs, blood on their feet, and excuse me for being so graphic, but I remember that. I'm standing up all day, but they made sure that they prayed before they went to bed. I saw that. It got in here. Two things that my father told me and showed me and taught me. One, God exists. He exists, and he's there to help. No promise on easy life. No promise on having everything go the way you want it to go. But there is a God. And he constantly and continuously reminded me of that. Later, when I finished, finally, school, and got ordained, etc., I have to say, I'd like to say, and I hope I'm right, I think I am. I think he was extremely proud of what I did, which helped me alleviate a little bit of the, and I'm saying it to you, the guilt that I felt having to put them through what I put them through. But that's the way it is. And again, they never complained. And he was always there. What do you need? What do you need? What do you need? A father is someone who gives lessons. He gives from lessons learned from life. And he gives these lessons in a way that sometimes I don't appreciate, sometimes I did not appreciate, and sometimes took me a long, long time ever to find out that he was in fact correct and right. What I'm saying about my father, every single person in here right now has a father or had a father, and whatever lessons you've learned, we have learned, have not been necessarily the way we wanted to listen to them, the way we wanted to learn them. They weren't perfect. My father was not perfect, and I certainly know how that works too. I'm not either. Ask my children. The fact is that they're there as examples, as inspiration, and as people that never stop giving. I said my father gives us two things. My father gave me two things. One is the knowledge that there is a God, without question. The second says to honor your name. Your name is the most precious thing that you have. You don't have to have a lot of money. You don't have to have a lot of titles in front of your name or behind your name. You don't have to have a lot of wealth. You need honor. And your name is your honor. And I've tried as best I can to respect that teaching. And I share that with my children, as I'm sure every single parent shares that with his or her children. Money has nothing to do with it. It has everything to do with our character and with our willingness to be there, a part of something bigger than we are, and to show the other person, if I'm working for someone else, that he's getting his money's worth for my being there. The part about the God being there, many, many years ago I shared with you this onion skin. It's on onion skin. Those of you that are my age, above 25, know what onion skin is. It's paper, very, very thin paper that was used by the Postal Service throughout the world to weigh less than regular paper, so that it could be, if it was air-mailed or if it was, however it was sent, to be less troublesome in carrying it. This is among the most precious things I have in my possession. It's an onion skin from International Red Cross Committee, Geneva, Switzerland, dated February 22, 1944, to Mr. John Pistolas, 202 Princess Street, Wilmington, North Carolina, regarding Zoitsa Pistolas, my mother, Greece. He was in the armed forces. He was doing whatever he was doing, but he never forgot his family. He kept sending them whatever money he was making, $50 more than the regular guy was making because he was jumping out of airplanes. But he never forgot them. But back then, they didn't have these blessed electronic devices of communication that we today call the ubiquitous, the constantly in front of us telephones. I can speak to Japan on the other side of the world right now. All I have to do is pick up my phone and call. Back then, it took days and weeks and months to converse and learn what's going on. He didn't know what was going on in his village. He didn't know what was happening to his wife. He didn't know what was happening to his parents and his siblings. So he had put in a request to the Red Cross to go when they were in the area to find out what was going on. I can only imagine what he got or how he felt when he got this letter. Dear Mr. Pistolas, we have received the following cabled reply from the International Red Cross Committee. And it says, Athanasios Pistolas, my papu, answers January 6th to John Pistolas, all is well. Send news. Imastikala. Stile masnea. They didn't know. Nobody knew if one or the other was still alive. So this is what I'm saying. The kind of impact that these people, these old people, that we may now be looking at photographs, old faded photographs, and we say, oh, that was my papu, that was my yaya, that was my thea, that was my theo, that was whoever. There was a character there. There was a belief. There was a commitment. And I hope and pray to God that we not lose, that we not forget. I'm finishing, finally. Sorry. I knew this was going to be long for me anyway. Sorry. Back in from 73 to 75, I was ordained in 73. On Father's Day of 1974, I was in Houston, Texas, as an assistant there at the cathedral. And I had the radio on, and back then, KTRH was one of the first radios in the United States, talk radios, 1974. I was in my car, and as I was driving along, this is something new, just talking radio, right? So as we were going along, it was the week of Father's Day, and this gentleman, the announcer, issued a poem that some of you old-timers, again, over 25, may remember. Name Paul Harvey. He was an outstanding radio announcer, very just good. If you ever have time, go back on YouTube. We have to go on YouTube now. But to find out about him, but he wrote a little poem. When I left Houston, I had a copy of the poem with me because I got it from the radio station. It impressed me that much. And somewhere, I read it once in my first parish in Knoxville, Tennessee, when we left Houston. I read it once there and I lost it. I've shared with you ideas about it in the past from here, but my beloved, my wife, how she did it, I have no clue. She found it. She found a copy. I'd like to share this with you. 50 years ago for me, hit me. 50 years later, still hitting. A father is a thing that is forced to endure childbirth without an anesthetic. A father is a thing that growls when it feels good and laughs out loud when it's scared half to death. A father never feels entirely worthy of the worship in his child's eyes. He never is quite the hero his daughter thinks, never quite the man his son believes him to be. And this worries him sometimes, so he works too hard to try and smooth the rough places in the road for those of his own who will follow him. A father is a thing that gets very angry when school grades aren't as good as he thinks they should be. So he scolds his child, although he knows it's the teacher's fault. Fathers grow old faster than other people, And while mothers can cry when it shows and where it shows, fathers stand there and beam outside and die inside. Fathers have very stout hearts, so they have to be broken sometimes, or no one would know what is inside. Fathers give daughters away to other men who aren't nearly good enough so that they can have grandchildren who are smarter than anybody else's. Fathers fight dragons almost daily. They hurry away from the breakfast table off to the arena, which is sometimes called an office or a workshop, where they tackle the dragon with 3 heads: weariness, work, and monotony. Knights in shining armor, kind of. Fathers make bets with insurance companies about who will live the longest. And though they know the odds, they keep right on betting, and even as the odds get higher and higher, they keep right on betting more and more. But fathers enjoy an earthly immortality, and the bet is paid off to the part of him that he leaves behind. I don't know where fathers go when they die, but I have an idea that after a good rest, he won't be happy unless there is work to do. He won't just sit there on a cloud and wait for the girl that he's loved and the children that she's bore. He'll be busy there too, oiling the gates and smoothing the way. Happy Father's Day.